has been a shortcoming the industry has been working to overcome for years, but with too little progress. Now, with the onset of the pandemic and the subsequent changes in consumer shopping patterns, finding a fix is imperative. Joining me today is Omer Kulka, CMO of printing solutions firm Kornit Digital, to discuss the technology that's enabling companies to better match products to consumer demand. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So my first question is, inventory reduction has been on the to-do list for the apparel industry for years. And in my opinion, very little progress has been made, and it remains to be a major challenge for most. Why can't retailers get the assortment right? Why can't they get the supply and demand quotient correct?
The entire business model was built on a supply and demand model, meaning that I design something and I produce it and I'm shipping it over to where it's being consumed or about to be consumed, and then I create the demand. What happened in the last few years is when people started buying online, the entire ecosystem of how they consume fashion has changed completely. And the trend right now is not being set by the brands anymore, but rather by the people themselves. And in a world of demand and supply, where suddenly you have a trend and then you need to react to it, the current ways of producing fashion, the current supply chains simply cannot do this, simply cannot fit that model anymore.
So a big part of being successful and reacting to consumer trends is speed. And speed has been the go-to mandate for the industry for a while. The apparel industry needs to be more agile to respond to these demands. But can you provide an example of how, I don't know, maybe one or two of your clients have been able to reduce risk while also boosting sell-throughs and margins with on-demand production?
So first of all, let's talk a little bit about speed first, okay? So first of all, speed has its cost, okay? So speed in the supply chains of fashion was a major driver of a lot of fast fashion as we know it. I mean, we even put speed in the name there, right? So fast fashion is probably, really the archetype of how to introduce speed into the existing supply chains. Now, that works really well, but in a fairly limited way. And without going into names, not too many brands are very successful in fast fashion. Actually, it's a very limited, it's a successful model in a very limited way. Very successful indeed. However, it has its cost. So when you run it fast, you actually get better at it. You optimize what you're actually doing right now. So you have shorter supply chains, more agility, more flexibility. You reduce your risk, but you don't eliminate it, okay? And it has its limitation, it has its cost. What we're talking about here is something completely different, okay? If you look at the retail model and you say, no, guys, it's not supply and demand anymore, even though you can actually supply and demand a lot faster, it's demand and supply, you actually start creating on demand. And when you produce on demand, what happens is that, in a sense, instead of trying to sell what you already produced, you're producing what you already sold. That doesn't reduce the risk, that minimizes the risk, that eliminates the risk completely, because it's not the same thing just doing it a little better. It's doing it completely differently, okay? It's actually getting on-demand manufacturing. So somebody actually buys something and only then you manufacture it. So you're actually not sitting on any inventory that is at risk. And you created that from an inventory that's a baseline inventory that doesn't have seasonality issues, doesn't go out of style. So it eliminates that inventory risk completely.
Now, pivoting, I want to just pivot for a second, but stay on the inventory concept. Overproduction is not only a revenue issue, but it's a huge environmental issue. So how can on-demand production become a bigger part of the sustainability conversation? Because if we can just reduce the waste, that's the quickest way to become a more sustainable industry.
I completely agree. And I think that you really hit the nail on its head here, because when people talk about sustainability in fashion, they tend to minimize, as you said, as you put it yourself, they minimize the conversation into, hey, I'm using less water, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But in fact, one of the biggest costs on the environment is overproduction. Right now, figures right now are talking somewhere between 20 to 25. I read figures about 22, 23% of items are never sold at all. So from a financial perspective, it's those markdowns, but not only the markdowns. After that, it's the unsold goods. And the unsold goods is not the cost only for the companies that actually made that and didn't manage to sell it, but it's also that ultimate cost for the environment.
Right.
Now, just to give you some examples, this tee that I'm wearing here, in order to make one tee, you need to use 2.5 tons of water. Okay, and that's not about the dyes and the dye stuff and you know the post processing of the fabric, etc. Most of it, by the way, goes into the irrigation of the cotton. Okay, this is why we're talking about a much bigger scale, a much bigger picture here. Now, if I made a tee that was never sold and had to go to landfill because it was already printed and done and it was just lost due to you know, bygone seasons and trends that are not selling anymore, I threw 2.5 tons of water into the garbage. So I use all these unused resources were there for nothing. A pair of denim is about 7.5 tons of water, just to give you an understanding. So I'm wearing a jeans and a t-shirt right now. These are 10 tons of water that are used just to make this. Every pair of those that is being thrown away, these are unused resources. On demand eliminates that completely. So from a financial perspective, yes, it's the bottom line of never having markdowns, okay? Never having sold out best sellers and never having marked down inventories. But from an environmental impact, it means never making anything that is not going to be used.
For companies that are making the switch, or in the back of their mind, they want to test it out, how does Kornit work with them to determine how to incorporate just-in-time manufacturing into their current operations? Are there certain products, like, okay, you're wearing a t-shirt right now. Is there certain products that are easier? Is there certain equipment that's, you know, easier to come by?
I'll give you an example. So we have customers that are running what you know, something that you call a micro moment. Okay, this is like a really short trend, in time that, you know, something happens at a sports event, for example, and boom, that's it. You have a window of opportunity, 24, 48 hours to monetize on that specific moment. Our digital technology right now can simulate screen print and analog printing. Why? Because we know this is what some of our customers actually want. So I think that a lot of the limitations are not there anymore, but there are limitations of knowledge and perception. I think there's a lot of market education that's still needed here. And also there is a limitation of there is an entry barrier here, okay? Because if you want to produce large masses, and if you look at any standard brand, even the smallest category, you know, there's a mass of items there. And in order to be able to produce that, you need to create, you know, some basically new production facilities. And to create a new digital production facility from scratch, it's you need to put a lot of skin in the game. And I think that a lot of people are kind of like dabbling with that and not really sure. However, we do see a tremendous shift this year. But I think that what COVID proved is it's not about tweaking your existing supply chain. It's about creating something new. You cannot make it the same way you did it before. It's just a little better. It's just not going to cut it anymore, because the back end and the front end just don't fit anymore. You need to create a completely new supply chain. And I'm really happy to see that more and more people understand that, and they're moving in that direction.
I want to thank you for your time today. I hope you're going to join us again, because I think that your role in the supply chain is just going to become more and more important. And I love to stay up to date and see how you as an organization, also your clients are adapting to this as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I would love to join you again.